Imagine this. You're walking through the grocery store on the way to get your favorite fruits and veggies. You get to the produce aisle and it's empty. There's nothing there. Bare shelves. Completely empty. No apples, no oranges, grapes, berries, squash, zucchini, cucumbers, nothing. But what happened? What could lead to all of the shelves in the produce section just being completely empty? What could cause no fruits and vegetables? Like, they're everywhere. What could lead to no fruits and veggies? Bees. Well, really, the lack of. No bees, no vegetables. So bees are responsible for 75% of all of the pollination in the United States. And that's about the same anywhere you go. Bees are super important when it comes to pollination. We might think of bees as the little guys who make all of our honey, or maybe even just the annoying little bugs that sometimes sting us. But they play a really big, really important role when it comes to plants. So they have one of the most important jobs. They fertilize the bulk of all flowering plants, and we really need that to happen. So you might be curious, but how do these tiny little insects play such a big role, right? How does that happen? They're bees. They're like this big, if not smaller. Well, let's take a look at our friend Bumble over here. So Bumble is a little bee, right? Every day he leaves the hive and he goes out looking for some nectar. Nectar is made by plants, and it's made by plants to attract insects, and you'll see why in just a second. So he leaves his hive on the search for nectar, which he gets from the flowers so that he can bring it back to the hive and they can make it into honey. They need nectar to make honey. So he goes out, he finds his flower, his little flower guy, lands on it. Well, each time he lands on the flower, pollen from the stamen of the flower, the pollen sticks to his legs, just like if you were walking on the sidewalk and gum sticks to your shoes. It's just there. And now it's along for the ride anywhere you go. Well, pollen kind of works the same way. So it sticks to his legs at the first flower, and then he flies off to go to the next flower. Well, when he lands on that next flower, that pollen on his legs, some of it's going to rub off, and when it rubs off, if it lands in the stigma of the flower, boom, it's fertilized. But then, when he lands on that second flower, more pollen attaches to his fuzzy little legs. So each time he goes to a new flower, Bumble is just moving pollen all around, from one flower to the next. And this is called cross-pollination, and it's really important. So cross-pollination takes pollen from one flower and takes it and fertilizes another flower with it. Now, flowers could pollinate themselves. I know you're like, the flower already has pollen. Why doesn't it pollinate itself? It can. It can take its own pollen that it gets on its stamen, and it could transfer to the stigma, and it could self-pollinate. That's a thing. But to get really healthy, to get strong, healthy seeds, it needs cross-pollination. Cross-pollination produces, the best seeds. Grade A, super strong, super fit, good to go seeds. That's what we want. And you only get that from cross-pollination. So this is where Bumble and his friends really come in and save the day, because they're the reason that the plants can start to make those strong seeds. So that's the perfect teamwork. The bees go around, they get all the nectar they need for the honey, and the flowers are getting cross-pollinated every time they land to get new nectar, so they can have the strong seeds. And you're like, okay, why are you talking about seeds so much? Well, after it's fertilized, that's how the plants start making the seeds. And you're like, okay, we started off talking about fruits and vegetables. Why are we talking about seeds, right? Come on, Madison. Well, look at the next apple that you bite into, and what's inside? Seeds. That's because when a plant creates seeds, the body around the seeds, that's the fruits and vegetables that we eat all the time. We don't usually eat the seeds. I mean, we do sometimes with a lot of vegetables, but those are the seeds for plants to reproduce. Those are their offspring. So the seeds are in the fruits and vegetables. No seeds, no fruits and vegetables. No pollination, no fertilization, no seeds. Bees are super important to keep the cycle going. We really appreciate that cycle. That role that they play in pollinating is so important in the habitat that without them, the whole balance of the ecosystem would just be way out of whack. Like, it wouldn't run smoothly. It's like oil in the engine. You need it to keep things going. They're so important that we call them a keystone species. And a keystone species is one that many other plants and animals depend on to keep things running smoothly. That's bees. They fit that entire description. They're a keystone species. They're super important for every habitat that they live in. So it sounds like bees are super important. And that's because they are. What do you think would happen without the bees? Like, if you think about it and you're like, okay, we've talked about all these bees and all the things they do. What happens if there are no bees, right? Well, that's when you go back to that dreary, empty produce section that we talked about earlier. And that's really bad news for us, right? And all the other animals that eat fruits and vegetables. So that's a lot of empty produce aisles and a lot of hungry animals if we didn't have bees. Well, right now, the biggest threat to bees is climate change. So things are getting warmer, and that's changing the habitat that these bees live in. It's getting too warm for them, so their habitat's shrinking upwards, but at the same time, the bees aren't moving farther north, so their habitat's not expanding north, where it might actually be the right temperature for them now, because bees don't migrate. It's not like butterflies or birds who just move along to a better environment that fits their needs. Bees don't migrate. They build their hive. They stay in the same place. That shrinking habitat just means less space for the bees. And as climate change continues, they just get forced out of their habitat. It gets smaller. That means that bee populations are getting smaller. The rising temperatures also make it easier for them to spread diseases. There are lots of problems that come with climate change that affects the bees. That's not good. We need the bees. Climate change, bad for bees. So next time you see your friendly neighborhood pollinator, take a second, appreciate them and all the important work that they do, and also think about what you can do to stop climate change and save the bees. Like, we need to save the bees. What can we do to save the bees? Save the bees. Save the bees.